Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm welcome to our June meeting of the Public Safety Committee of Queens Community Board 1. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Hanway. I am the chair of the committee, and we are also joined by Frank Fredericks, the vice chair. We have a full agenda, and I really want to respect folks' time and end promptly at 8 o'clock, so we will get started. The two main points tonight are a presentation from Michael Browner of the Queens District Attorney's Office. He will discuss hate crimes and the prevalence of them and incidence of them, but most importantly, what the Queens DA does to combat them. He'll be looking at it through particularly an LGBTQ lens in honor of Pride Month, but it will deal with various forms of hate crimes. And then we will hopefully have a robust discussion after Q&A about the fall capital and expense requests that the community board will put in. We're just going to have an opening discussion to talk about priorities and needs there. And of course, we'll leave some room for any new business that members of the committee may have to bring. So we will turn it over to Michael. Really appreciate your taking the time this evening to join us, Michael. I encourage committee members in particular to prepare some questions for after the presentation. And Michael, I'll turn it over to you. Do you have any screen to share, or will you just?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing that as soon as I thank you guys for letting me come in.
Great.
I really appreciate being able to talk to you. Thanks, Lawrence, and thanks, Chris, for having me. I think I'm going to try to click over to the share button now. Let's see if that works. There we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. Again, my name is Michael Brobner from the Queens DA's office. I'm the chief of the Hate Crimes Bureau at the Queens DA's office. And what I want to do today is pretty much talk to you about how we prosecute and investigate hate crimes in Queens, and also mostly about the law and how it applies, because there's a lot of misconceptions about what's a hate crime and what's not a hate crime. Obviously, when you're talking about something like a hate crime, there's going to be some words that can be triggering. I apologize. I try to take them out. I will not be saying anything offensive, but some of the video clips and some of the statements that you're going to see and hear will be offensive. And unfortunately, that's just kind of how the beast is. I've tried to figure out ways around it. But when you're talking about hate crimes, a lot of times there's horrible things that are said, and we're talking about horrible things. So everyone kind of has an idea of what a hate crime is. But just because you have an idea of what it is doesn't mean it actually is a hate crime. So that's the biggest misconception, and that's kind of what I want to really focus on. In order to figure out whether something's a hate crime, you have to look at the penal law, and that's 485.05 specifically, which defines what a hate crime is. Basically, the defendant, the perpetrator, has to either intentionally select the person or intentionally commit the act or acts in whole or substantial part because of belief or perception regarding one of the protected classes. And that's race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender identity or expression, religion, religious practice, age, disability, or sexual orientation. This is the bonus element we have to prove when we're charging a hate crime. And there has to be, the underlying act has to also be a crime. So I'm going to get into a little more detail about that, but that's basically it. The defendant has to intentionally select the person or intentionally commit the acts in whole or substantial part because one of the protected classes. And one of the things to remember is when we're talking about belief or perception, the defendant doesn't have to be right. A lot of times these defendants aren't that smart. They'll think they're attacking someone who's Muslim, but they're actually Sikh. They'll think they're attacking someone who's gay, but they're actually straight. A lot of times it fundamentally doesn't matter because we're punishing the defendant for committing the act for this particular reason, not whether he's right or wrong, but because he commits this crime as a hate crime. And if you look at all the things that are protected, it basically applies to every race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender identity or expression, religion, religious practice, age, disability, or sexual orientation. Age means 60 years old or more. Disability includes both mental and physical impairment. And it applies to everyone because everyone has a race, everyone has a color, national origin, ancestry, a gender, gender identity or expression, religion or religious practice, even if it's atheism. Hopefully everyone will get to be at least 60 years old, and everyone has a sexual orientation. So it applies to basically everyone. But in order to prove that's a hate crime, just establishing that the defendants of one of these classes and the victims a different class is insufficient. That's actually written into the statute. So we have to prove that it was motivated in whole or substantial part. And I said that it has to be a criminal act that the defendant does, but it doesn't cover all crimes. It covers most crimes against people, like assaults, kidnapping, murder, etc. It covers most crimes against property, burglary, arson, criminal mischief, all the attempts and conspiracies to commit these, but it doesn't cover all crimes. For example, making graffiti isn't covered. Some weapon possession charges are, some aren't. Endangering the welfare of a child isn't. So whenever we have a case, we have to make a determination as to whether a crime took place and whether it was for one of these reasons, whether it was the defendant committed in whole or substantial part because of the protected class. And if we are able to prove someone committed a hate crime, what it does is it fundamentally elevates the sentencing. So for most cases, if it goes from 1, it goes up 1. So an A misdemeanor, the highest level misdemeanor, would then be prosecuted as an E felony, the lowest level felony. A C felony would be prosecuted as a B felony. So in other words, the minimum sentence would rise. B and A felonies, it just raises the minimum sentences for these. And so if you commit one of these hate crimes, you're looking at more substantial charges. Another charge I want to talk about is aggravated harassment in the second degree. This is basically harassment as a hate crime. So the defendant has to commit the crime of harassment. In other words, with the intent to harass, annoy, alarm, or threaten another because of belief or perception regarding those protected classes. The defendant attempts to, threatens to, or does strike, shove, kick, or otherwise subjects another person to physical contact. This allows us to go after people that, let's say, spit on someone because of who they are, their protected class. This is an A misdemeanor. Without this statute, it would be only a violation, which would not be a crime. So if someone is walking down the street and spits on someone for no reason, even if the police arrive there seconds later and the victim is able to say, that guy just spit on me, not a crime. But if the defendant were to do that because of the sexual orientation of the victim, then even if the officer didn't witness it, it would be an A misdemeanor, so we'd still be able to go forward. He'd still be able to make the arrest of the defendant who committed that crime. And the thing that's kind of disturbing about hate crimes is just their numbers. This is the most recent. As you can see, there's been a fairly steady rise in hate crimes. In 2020, there was only a little more than 8,000, and then it rose to a little more than about 10,500, and then since then it's been over 11,000. And New York City is no different, unfortunately. Hate crimes are rising. Actually, last year we were down slightly. It was basically flat. But in 2022, we were only at 650. So there's still an increase from that baseline of 2020. And if you look at the hate crimes, the 13% of the hate crimes are based on sexual orientation. And that's kind of been consistent. Anti-Jewish hate crimes tends to be the most common, and then anti-sexual orientation tends to be number 2. So it is an issue, and it's something that we have to focus on. And part of the reason is because hate crimes are different than other crimes. The Supreme Court actually, in explaining hate crimes and prosecuting hate crimes, notes that hate crimes inflict greater individual and societal harm and are more likely to provoke retaliatory crimes, inflict distinct emotional harms on their victim, and incite community unrest. So that's why it's important that we go after these cases and stop them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Hate crimes have a massive impact on the victim. It's because they're being attacked, not just because they were unlucky, but because of who they are. It's not a random act of violence. It goes after something that's very essential. And because of that, it can be really emotionally damaging and hard on the victim because there's nothing the victim can do about it. You can't be in a situation where, let's say someone's the victim of a robbery, they could say, look, I'm never going to go down that dark alley again, or I'm only going to walk with a friend, so I have protection. If you're attacked because you're gay, because you're trans, that's something that you can't say, okay, I'm going to stop being gay, I'm going to stop being trans and address it. So because of that, it can be really, really hard on the victim. And it also impacts more than just the victim. You know, if someone's the victim of a robbery, that sucks for them. But when someone's a victim of a robbery as a hate crime, that has a chilling effect, an emotionally draining effect, not just on the victim, but other people in the victim's community that are similarly situated, or other in similar communities. Let's say someone gets attacked because they're Muslim. Well, maybe someone who's Sikh is going to be concerned that they're going to be attacked, or someone who's Jewish could be concerned about that, or any other religious group. They could be concerned about that. It also affects all of society. We don't want to be in a situation where people are being victimized because of who they are. We all work best and we all benefit the most when we can all interact with one another and not have walls between us separating us. It can also lead to more violence. A lot of these cases get covered in the media, so you can either have copycats, other people saying, wow, someone did this to this person, I'm going to do it to get similar media coverage. Or you can have people from the victimized community say, we got attacked, an eye for an eye, let's go back after them. So for all that reason, it's really important that we prosecute these cases and focus a lot of time and effort on that. But hate crimes are also unique. They're unique and it makes it more challenging to prosecute these cases, in part because there's greater public attention. And with the greater public attention, it involves more parties that are involved in each case that we handle. There's the victim's community, there could be advocacy groups, the media, because these things impact so many different people, it gets covered by the media. And then it also has the really challenging element and unusual element of kind of establishing a motive. And we have to establish that the defendant committed the crime in whole or in substantial part. If you ever go to law school, not that I'm encouraging that, but one of the first things you learn in criminal law class is we don't have to prove why the defendant committed the crime in order to prove the defendant's guilty. In other words, if someone's stealing bread from a store, we don't have to prove that he did it because he was hungry, or that he did it to feed his family, or that he did it because he hated the owner of the store and was trying to punish the store's owner, or he did it because he just enjoys the thrill of stealing things. We don't have to prove any of that. It's irrelevant for what we have to prove. But with hate crimes, you kind of have to prove that motive, that it was committed in whole or substantial part. And that's challenging. Also, the witnesses themselves can be challenging. I mean, these are people that are frequently not part of the majority, and they view the police and prosecutors like myself as the government, and and they might have had negative personal experiences either with the police or with prosecutors before that. They might be afraid of being deported, especially under the current administration. They could also feel that there's community sentiment against them and that they might not get a fair shake if it goes to trial. And by that, I mean, just think about how these different groups are portrayed in the media, both TV and in movies, as well as in social media. This is American Dad, you know, making fun of someone being transgender. This is, I think it's still on TV. And then the response to Dylan Mulvaney when Budweiser allowed her to represent them.
Not sure if there's any way to do that.
Was that able to be viewed by you guys?
We see it,
We
but
can
we
see
can't
it,
hear
yeah.
the sound.
Oh, well, that's disappointing.
If
I don't
you
know.
there's a I believe if you hit that little arrow next to the microphone where it says audio on the bottom left, I think you should be able to select what your audio is coming out of. But I mean, it's all good.
All right. I have one more, so when we get to that, I'll ask for audience participation on how to do that. All right. So anyway, as you can see from this, the reaction was not positive. And that makes it harder for us to build that trust or to have the jury feel comfortable with that. Another issue is these crimes are really emotionally taxing and draining. Um, you know, a lot of times when someone's a victim of a hate crime, they're not going to first say, "Oh, they said these horrible things to me." A lot of times they'll just be dealing with the more challenging issue. There could be a language barrier on top of that. There could be cultural barriers, not feeling comfortable talking to the police that respond, either because of the police in their country not being reliable, or because of whatever the social dynamics are, and they don't understand the law, so they're not naturally going to be volunteering the information we need in order to show it's a hate crime. They could be focused on more pressing issues, like the fact that they were robbed or that they're injured, that they just want someone to help them. So we have to spend the time to find out more relevant facts about whether the crime was a hate crime or not, even if they're not being introduced right at the beginning. And what we're asking them to do is kind of a big thing, to testify about being a victim of a hate crime, because these things are usually things that are personal. Sometimes they're private issues. Sexual orientation is a classic example of that. Might require them to come out in public with media attention too, and coming out with in front of a jury, people they've never met before. All that can be really, really hard and challenging. So it's not an easy thing to get someone to come forward as a victim of a hate crime. One of the things we can do at the DA's office is we can offer a lot of programs to people that are victims of a hate crime to help them. And with regards to LGBTQ issues, we work with lots of different organizations, and we can set victims up so that they can get the counseling they need to help them process being the victim of a hate crime and to really help them heal from that. Having said that, even without that, when we've been able to go to trial and when they've been able to hear the court and the jury find the defendant guilty, there is a lot of closure and healing that comes from that. So let's talk a little about what we do in the Queen's CA's office. When Melinda Katz came in, she established a specialized bureau that only handles hate crimes. And that is really rare. In New York City, Manhattan doesn't have one. They have a unit, but Brooklyn does, Staten Island does not, and neither does the Bronx. So it's really great that we have a unit, one of the few in the country, that just does hate crimes. Very few offices have a bureau that does that. And because of that, we're able to develop an expertise in prosecuting these cases, which are challenging. We have a really close relationship with the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force, which is made up of very experienced and excellent detectives that have special training to handle and investigate these cases. We talk to them all the time. We do a lot of community outreach to try to stop hate crimes and to let people know to report hate crimes so that we can prevent them in the future and make sure that we have that open dialogue with community. We work 24/7. We have a hotline. All of that allows us to be more effective. And it's also really good because all the hate crimes come through my bureau, and that allows us to be uniform in charging. So you don't have a situation where some case, which is not a hate crime, but might be viewed potentially as a hate crime, is charged as a hate crime, whereas other ones that are clearly hate crimes might not. So we're able to make sure that those mistakes don't happen. And it allows us to address the issue of overcharging. You don't want a situation where cases that aren't hate crimes are being charged at hate crimes, because then when we're asking for bail on cases where someone's charged with a hate crime and they are a significant threat, we don't want a situation where the judge is like, you always charge hate crimes and they're never prosecuted as hate crimes. I'm ignoring this. I'm going to let the defendant out. So we're very cognizant of that. And it's also ethically, we don't want to overcharge and charge people with something as damning as a hate crime if they didn't do it. It also allows us to be uniform in our plea policies. A lot of our defendants have psychological issues, and we want to be able to make sure that if we're offering those some sort of treatment as part of a plea, that that's being handled properly. And a lot of the defendants need sensitivity or anger management or anti-bias training. And that's something that we use frequently, and it's important that it be handled uniformly. And one of the other things we do, as I've mentioned already during this presentation, is we really emphasize reporting. As you can see from the definition of a hate crime, it's very hard to determine whether someone committed a hate crime in whole or substantial part because of one of these factors, one of these protected classes. So it's really important that people report the crime, because the sooner they report it, the easier it is for us to find the defendant, the perpetrator who did it, and make the determination as to whether it's a hate crime, and not lose the evidence that we need in order to prove it's a hate crime. And speaking about proving hate crimes, there's a lot of things that we look at when we're investigating and proving hate crimes. Because what we have to do is establish that the defendant committed the crime in whole or substantial part. And that's very fact specific and usually almost always circumstantial. So some of the things that we look at is what was happening right before. Was there something that triggered the defendant or drew the defendant's attention to the person they attacked or to the building that they targeted? Another thing we look at is what was the victim wearing? Was there anything that would cause the defendant to target that victim because of his or her clothing? But we also look at the defendant. What was the defendant wearing? Did he have tattoos? Was there something that the defendant had which we can use to establish the bias, the motive for why they did it? We always look at surveillance videos because a lot of times that will show what happened even if the victim was unaware of it. And we also check social media. Is this defendant posting things that indicate a bias or prejudice or targeting of any of these groups? And proving the intent is really hard, and we look at lots of things. Are they members of a racist organization? If they are, we might be able to introduce that at trial. Do they have a history of bad acts targeting the same victim? Is this a situation where the defendant is always committing assaults and they just so happen to be against someone who's Asian or someone who's gay or someone who's trans? We can then show that history and prove that that's why he attacked, or the defendant attacked the victim in this case. We also use expert witnesses, people that can explain some words that might have been said, especially with like white supremacists, where they're using things like the term Rohawa, racial holy war, or saying 88, standing for the 8th letter of the alphabet for Hal Hip, HH, or saying things like the 14 words, all these kind of racist tropes. That's really important for us to have an expert so the jury can understand what those terms, what those coded language meant. A lot of times we think that if there's a racist or offensive word said during the crime, that can establish a hate crime just in itself. And that may or may not be true. It depends on the situation. For example, a lot of our cases involve like road rage incidents. If someone's in a car accident and they get out and start yelling at the other victim, the other person in car accident, they'll say a bunch of horrible things. They'll call them fat, stupid, ugly, dumb, blind, all those things. Well, that's not a hate crime. And just because they then look at the defendant's skin or the other guy's skin and then use a racist term doesn't mean that they ultimately assaulted the person because of their race. It could just be because they road rage. They were angry about the accident versus two people that are strangers walking down the street. The defendant says some racist comment, some anti-gay comment, and then attacks the person. That's where the racial or the epithet, the words, can establish the hate crime. This was a case that we had back in 2017, where the defendant was going around and spraying Obama and then a derogatory slur. So we had to determine whether this was political speech and he was just implying that Obama was weak or bad, or if it was a hate crime. And we spent the time figuring out where this defendant was putting this damage, this criminal mischief, and we noticed a pattern that it was on people who were openly gay or supported gay rights. And based upon that, we felt comfortable charging the hate crime in this case. Another thing we look at is location, location, location. You know, houses of worship, religious sites, a lot of times we can use that to prove that's a hate crime. Or if the defendant attacks someone outside a gay bar or after a gay pride parade, all those would be really powerful evidence to show that it was a hate crime, that the victim was targeted because of who the victim was. Another things we consider is, you know, the nature of the crime, how extreme it was. You know, it's called hate for a reason. A lot of times the defendant will have a strong emotional, rage-filled reaction to whoever the victim is because of their hatred against that type of protected class. They view the victim as less than human and feel justified in committing the crime. This was a case that I handled against Daniel Rodriguez and Daniel Allman. These defendants were both in their early 20s, and they came across their victim, Jack Price, who was about 50 years old. And one of them knew the victim from the neighborhood and knew he was gay. And they decided to attack him and rob him. But they did more than just rob him. They knocked him down to the ground. They called him all sorts of offensive names and words, accused him of being a pedophile, horrible stuff. And they hit him so hard and kicked him so many times, as you can see, well more than they needed just to take his wallet. He ended up spending 22 days in the hospital in a medically induced coma. They punctured both his lungs, they broke his ribs, they fractured his jaw. He lost some of his peripheral vision and hearing in his right ear. And they did it because he was gay. And we were able to prove that, and they both ultimately were convicted. One was sentenced to 8 years and the other was 12 years. We also use confessions and statements. A lot of times this can be the most powerful and damning evidence because it's the defendant in their own words explaining why they committed the particular crime. And a lot of times they feel justified. And as they're explaining why they did it, you can see and you can hear they feel justified because this person didn't deserve or doesn't deserve or isn't like us, or, you know, they started it by coming around with their whatever. And, you know, you get that, and that can be really powerful, and we can use that to establish a hate crime. Now, this is the other time where it'd be great if I could get the thing to work. How do I do that?
So, Michael, I just looked it up because I didn't know either.
Okay, good.
If you can unshare, and then when you press share again, there might be a box that pops up that offers you the option of enabling sound.
Okay, I'm gonna see share
There should
sound.
be a checkbox.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
on
see
the
if that
share.
does it.
First, you have to unshare and then press share screen again.
Okay, let me see if that does it.
Yep.
Get out. So when you get out of the truck,
Did that work? Okay,
It
good.
worked.
Oh, now I went too far. There we go.
so when you get out of the truck, do you have the bat in your hand?
No, not yet.
All right, and then you say, "Hey, nigga, what's up?"
Oh, no, I said, what up, nigga? Like
Okay.
that.
And what did he say back to you?
He go, what up? Like, ready to fight.
And what'd you do at that point?
I grabbed the bat.
And at that point,
All three of them started running. I'm running after them. I'm 240 pounds. These are three skinny kids. Two of them ran in the weeds. The other kid, he hid. It was on 78th Street. I couldn't get after them, so my friend Anthony jumped in the driver's seat. He goes, get in. I go up the block, I go around, I see two of them running in the weeds. In the corner of my eye, I see this kid standing like by a bush. I jumped out of the truck with the bat, and I started chasing him.
and that's the kid with the red shirt.
Yeah, that's where I caught him on 79th Street. He ran right around the corner.
All right, I just want to
And he
make it
tripped over
clear.
the thing.
So you pull up in the truck, the three of them standing there, you get out
Without a bat.
without the bat, you say, "What's up, nigga?" He says, "What's up?" Then you go, you grab the bat, and these three guys run away.
Run.
At this point, Anthony gets into the driver's seat,
Yes.
and he says, "Get in," and then you drive around the corner. And when you get around the corner, you see the two guys, the blue and white shirt, running into the weeds.
And I wasn't running in the weeds.
Why not?
I'm not running in the weeds. I says, no. I says, they're looking to get something tonight. Now,
Why'd you think that?
2 weeks ago they robbed a car. And,
These kids?
no, not these kids. And
But who? What? I don't understand.
witnesses saw It was my friend's mother, and witnesses saw the kids running the weeds. So I said, let's check
What
by the
kids?
weeds. I don't know the kids.
Were they white, black?
No, they're black kids. They're black kids. 1 week ago, a kid by 207 Park got stabbed. A 14-year-old kid on his bike. He got stabbed by a car full of black people.
Right. So now, when you saw these three guys running, you said that they were running down by the weeds.
No, they weren't. They were walking.
Well,
at
if they
this
were going
point.
down by the weeds, what do you think they were going to do down there?
I have no idea. One kid had snippers. One kid had a screwdriver. I have no idea what the other kids had. One kid had a school bag.
Right.
I don't know what the other kid had, but the kid that I caught had snippers and a screwdriver.
Now, are there a lot of black people in your neighborhood?
No,
All right. And which neighborhood is this? Is this Howard Beach?
this is Howard Beach.
All right. What's the other side called?
Lindenwood. That's where I live.
Now, Lindenwood is.
Lindenwood's black, Spanish, Indian, white.
Wasn't it?
I live with these
Isn't
people.
it just right on the other side of?
So this is Nick Minucci kind of explaining why he and his buddy assaulted a guy named Glenn Moore. They fractured his jaw and stole his shoes. He was ultimately convicted of assault in first degree as a hate crime, and he was sentenced to 15 years. Another thing we use graffiti and tattoos to try to establish a hate crime. Sometimes it's really obvious. Tattoos, when you think about these, if someone's putting something racist on their body, which hurts A, and B, causes it takes time and money, that the courts have held may reflect the defendant's inner thoughts. It's almost like you can see what they're thinking. It kind of shoots out through their head. Another thing we use is search warrants. This was a case during COVID times of Patrick Mateo. And what happened is the defendant attacked a woman, Asian woman, outside the Flushing bakery. And she didn't speak English that well, so she didn't know what he had said when he attacked her and knocked her down. But it was picked up by the media, and someone from the New York Times reached out and actually spoke with Patrick Mateo, the defendant, and not speaking with him, but actually with a text message. And he said he had told the woman, "You're in America, not China. Please give me space with coronavirus." So obviously he's presuming that because she's Asian, she has coronavirus, and that's why he felt justified attacking her. But we had to get this evidence because we can't just ask the New York Times to give us their stuff. So we were able to get a search warrant for his cell phone, which then had this exchange with this reporter, as well as a CNN reporter and another reporter. So we were able to then use that. So we were able to put this evidence before the grand jury and then able to charge him with a hate crime as well. So that's pretty much my presentation. I hope I didn't take too long, and I'm happy to take whatever questions. And just in case anyone needs to reach out to me, there's my phone number and my email.
Michael, thank you so much. This was really informative. It was a little upsetting at points, but that's the nature of these crimes.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to apologize because I referred to you as Browner and not Brovner.
Close
Clearly,
enough.
these Dwayne Reed reading glasses are not doing the job that they used to. So, my apologies.
Don't worry about
for that.
It happens all the time. Not a problem.
I am sorry about that, but thank you for that. I'd love to see if any of the committee members. As a rule at these meetings, committee members may ask questions. So if you're a member of the Public Safety Committee and have a question, we'd love to hear from you. You can raise your hand. I'll scan and see if anybody has their... The first one I saw is Keon. Keon, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Yeah, thanks so much for such a great presentation. It was super, as you said, solemn and but also enlightening. So I super appreciate the time you've put into that. Mine is just a quick question. I saw that one of the techniques you had mentioned for mitigation are things like sensitivity training, and I've seen mixed evidence on that. I'm curious if there's anything you can speak to on whether that has actually been found to drive results consistently, and perhaps how that's evaluated.
So when we use those programs, it depends on the situation. Obviously, if someone's committed a really horrific crime, we're not even going to be looking at sensitivity training. If they've committed a hate crime, but it's one of those things that it could be a hate crime, it might not. I feel comfortable charging it. He has an argument, or she has an argument saying, well, no, it was this, it's taken out of context. Those are the cases where I feel more comfortable offering sensitivity to try to address it. So even if it wasn't a hate crime, we're sure it won't happen again. We usually use what's called a conditional plea. We'll have the defendant plead guilty to the top count or a felony. And if they successfully complete the program, and depending on the program, it could take 6 months to a year. And during that time, they don't get into any other problems, then we can work it out where it's either they get sentenced to a misdemeanor or even a violation, just so that we can make sure there's an order of protection that extends to the victim, and also that the defendant's not going to do it again. I mean, our real concern is, obviously we want to make the victim whole, but we also really want to make sure that these crimes don't happen again. So that's why we look at these type of programs. Sometimes I know people that have really benefited from them, and they've talked to us afterwards and say that it really helped them. And then there are others that I'm less confident of. But it's hard to know until after the fact.
Is it ever used as like a preventative measure, like say sexual harassment training that like the workplace would be mandated to take as a means of potentially mitigating a future occurrence?
So that would be something that wouldn't be a criminal.
Right.
We can't have people do that. Even if we think it's a great idea, we can't say, hey, here's what would be great, everyone do this. That's the stuff that the legislatures get to do, and different offices make the decision.
I meant in the workplace or something like that. Like everyone.
We have to, as city workers, we get to go through them once a year.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Kian. Any other questions? I have a couple that I'd love to ask, but I want to give other committee members first opportunity to do so. Okay, I see none, so I'll go ahead. Michael, you spoke about some of the different conditions that the circumstances that qualify something as a hate crime. I just want to be clear. A very intense verbal assault where a person makes motions, threatening physical motions, and comes close to somebody in a very menacing way, but does not touch them, or there's no physical contact, including spitting, would that never qualify as a hate crime?
So those are the ones that are really fascinating. We had a case where the defendant was definitely off and was like kind of making anti-Asian comments under his breath, and which upset a woman that was on the subway with him. And the woman was like so freaked out, she got off. And then the defendant also got off. And the defendant was walking behind her, and she felt, I'm worried that he's going to do something, and then turned around and sprayed him with mace or pepper spray. And then he pushed her. And we got that case. And as you're looking at it, she definitely felt threatened, 100%. Did the defendant intend to threaten her? I don't know if we can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what we have to do. So in that type of situation, even with all the words and the things and feeling uncomfortable, we probably didn't have a hate crime. What you're describing, it really, again, depends on context. That's why I keep talking about circumstantial. If the person's like coming at you, criticizing you, making some sort of racial slurs while doing it, and it serves some sort of reason, like trying to convince you to change your religion, or trying to convince you that this is wrong and that is right. Even with like gestures, that's probably not enough. If the defendant then says, I'm going to kill you, and like is holding a fist and is like motioning like that,
right,
that gets much closer, and maybe you do have the threat.
Gotcha.
But it, especially in New York, where there's a lot of crass language used regularly, it's kind of meaningless.
Right.
And a lot of times we get called, hey, there's this person on the end of our block. Every time he sees me, he makes a racist comment, and it's getting worse and worse. And he's telling me I don't belong in the country, that I'll burn in hell, la, la, la. And you're like, what we basically have to tell them is you should avoid that corner, because it's free speech and it's horrible. You can let the police know. They can check up on him to make sure he's not a threat to himself or others, but it's not a crime and the police can't take a report because it's not a crime.
Right. Okay, that's helpful. And then a question about graffiti. So
Yeah.
towards the beginning, you said that graffiti itself cannot be charged as a hate crime in any right.
Right.
Even if it's vile, racist graffiti. What would that normally be? Just a misdemeanor
So here's what's silly about the law. And recently they changed the law and added, I think, 66 more cases, rather statutes that were covered by the hate crime statute. They didn't add graffiti. Criminal mischief is already something that can be elevated. So you saw the example where the person wrote the N-word.
Yep.
That we charged as criminal mischief in the 4th degree as a hate crime because it was under $250 worth of damage, but it was without permission or authority. And then we charged making graffiti an A misdemeanor. That's not a hate crime.
Gotcha.
So the criminal mischief we could elevate from a misdemeanor to an
I
felony,
see. Okay.
but not but just doing the graffiti doesn't.
Right.
But
a history or a track record or of spraying graffiti that was racist or in the context of a different crime could be used as evidence, is what
100%. It would be just like either making graffiti that was racist or posting on social media stuff that was racist, and then they attack someone from that targeted race. That would be perfect, because not perfect in a good sense, but perfect for us to show that this is why. Look at his history, look at who he is, and this is evidence that he attacked this person not at random, but because of his bias.
Right. That's helpful. Great. Thank you. Any other questions before we let Michael have the rest of his evening back?
If not, I just want to thank you guys for letting me speak. I really appreciate it. Happy Pride Month. And, the one thing I would like to say as a takeaway is if you see a hate crime, even if you're not sure it's a hate crime, even if you're, God forbid, a victim of a hate crime, but you're not sure if it is, call the police, let them know, call them soon, report. It's really important for us to know where there's issues so we can put more police in that area to prevent it. And also so we have an accurate track record so we can see where the issues are.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks again for coming. Have a good evening.
Pleasure. Thanks for reminding me. Be safe, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Hi, Florence. You have your hand up?
Can we just do the roll call now?
Yeah, I just want to thank Florence for volunteering to do this. I can't access my work email from home right at the moment, so I don't have access to the list. So Florence kindly offered to do the roll. So thank you, Florence.
Chris Hanway.
Present.
Frank Fredericks. Frank.
Present. Sorry, I was on mute.
Kian Betancourt.
Here.
Ann Bruno's in the hospital. Jean Marie D'Oliva. Stacy. Dean Feratovic.
Here.
Dominique. Abdel Razik. Thank you. That's your attendance.
Thank you very much, Florence. We're going to move on to an initial review of our expense and capital requests as part of the annual process, which will take place in the fall. We don't have current documents, and Frank, our vice chair, has kindly put together a few questions that he thought could guide our conversation. Before we do that, if I have luck, I'm going to share my screen and show the items that wound up on the final list last year. You remember we put together our list, and then the committee the community board as a whole ranked items. Some fell off, some were pushed lower, and I'm going to share that now. Hopefully I'll be able to share it, and we can take a quick look at that before we discuss our any needs for and desires for next. Sorry, I think that was me. I am so sorry. I hope I didn't mess that up too much. All right, let's see. Share screen. Let's see. Window. That's not it. Yeah, is that it? No, that's us. Let's see. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. Yes, we can.
Did I just unscreen? You can still see it?
Yep, we can still see it.
I am so bad at this. I'm so sorry. And Florence, I'm sorry for temporarily pausing the recording. I hope that didn't mess anything up. Very typical for me. Okay, so these are the items that wound up. Remember, we had the ranking. This shows the final ranking for all of Community Board 1. Under capital, number 7 was provide new facilities such as a firehouse or EMS station, very broad. Number 8 was renovate or upgrade existing precinct houses, which obviously in our case would be the 114th. And then under expense items, we have number 7 under expense. Again, these were separate lists. Hire additional uniformed officers. Number 9, hire additional crossing guards. Number 19, additional 114th precinct training for NYPD personnel. No idea what 22 would encompass. Other expense budget requests for the FDNY. Number 23, expand funding for fire prevention and life safety initiatives. Number 35, hire additional uniformed officers. Number 38 and 39 were other additional expense requests. Florence, are these listed in more detail in the narrative section?
So all of these are in the book, and
Yeah,
the
understood.
only difference is in the book, it does have the narrative, which you could, if you want to, include yourself with, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I thought
Primary-
for the interest of time, I wouldn't go through the narrative. I thought I would just give these
Usually,
overall broad items, but it's not giving specificity for some of these that just say other expense budget requests.
usually the district manager does the narrative anyway, not the committee members. So
I'm not looking to write the narrative. I'm looking to
No.
remind us of what
But
was in last
want me
year's.
to show, do you want me to show the book, but then you're gonna have to go through all
Yeah,
of
I think
the-
we'll go ahead and just have that as a fairly broad overview. I apologize, folks, if that's not extremely enlightening, but I think more meaningful for us would be to have a conversation based on Frank's questions. I do want to bring to your attention that Florence brought up an item that dropped off last year, which the fire department has brought back to her attention. And I think it dropped off because we thought there would be a different funding mechanism or a different funding stream, but that would be the bariatric ambulances. And of course, the bariatric ambulances are pretty important because what they do is they transport patients who suffer from obesity, particularly really morbid obesity, which is obviously a serious health crisis that has all kinds of comorbidities. And those folks deserve the same level of care as everybody else. And if an ambulance cannot get them to the hospital, then we obviously have a problem. I certainly think it's a good idea. I'm not saying it should be on our list this year, but I thought it was worth mentioning because it is an item that the fire department would like, and it does seem to be an important item. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank and mute myself. Frank has framed some framing questions that might start some discussion tonight as we move into the fall, towards the fall process.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so as we know, as we move into the fall, we'll be looking at public survey data, whether there's new or existing, the requests that come in through the district manager from those departments and other places. But one thing we can do right now is just reflect on things we've heard this year, both in our committee meetings and in the general community board meetings, as well as things you might be hearing in other community organizations you may be participating in. So the first question is there anything, whether it's listed there or not, that you've heard more than once that has some sort of emphasis that you've heard from the community over this year since we did this in September? So if you would like to contribute and something that you've noticed as a pattern, please do raise your hand. Or you can comment in the chat and we can acknowledge those there as well. Anyone want to reflect on anything they've heard this year? I'll call in, folks. I'm slipping into my adjunct professorship when I'm ready to hot call, folks.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Frank?
What are some themes that you've heard from the public around public safety since September, whether in committee meetings, community board meetings, or more broadly in the community at large?
Teenagers at Ditmars.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a big one I've heard, especially at the NYPD meeting.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little more on, I mean, like, are they hanging out, causing public disturbances, drinking? I just try to get a sense of what the teenagers might be, how they might be causing a public safety issue.
Yeah, supposedly it's a similar group of teenagers that are there a lot. I think it's on Ditmars and 31st. And yeah, apparently they just like harass people walking by, throw things at them, yell at them. And it's been a similar group. Supposedly they have escalated at 10 YPD, but they just kind of keep coming back.
Deanne, so real quick, Deanne, feel free to put anything you'd like in the chat. While this is a committee member part of the process, you are a member of the public and sharing something that you are concerned about. Us committee members can't see that and reflect that. Feel free to use that chat. Kian, the only nudge I have for you is I think that's a really interesting programmatic concern. So now how might we imagine that as a budgetary suggestion? Is that more uniformed officers on the beat? Or is there an alternative method that we could be allotting, financial resources to address?
I mean, a resounding concern that I've heard from almost everyone that I think is pretty synced up with this is just the request to have more cops on a walking beat or on bicycles, specifically with the intent that they'd be able to better patrol areas that aren't served by cars, like parks, or just better be able to see the beat on the sidewalk rather than what they might see from an SUV. So I would say, yeah, that's probably a pretty good suggestion.
Do you think an after-school program of some kind would also be, I'm just thinking push and pull mechanisms. Are there other ways that teenagers could be, occupied in the afternoons that we could be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a like an expense standpoint, and I think I was on the budgetary committee before I even joined the community board. Just more after school activities. Obviously, the more proactively they can be busy with stuff, sports, some kind of club or anything that's offered, ideally free of charge. Um, Things like maybe extending library hours or something to that effect. I mean, that's just an idea
Mhm.
that popped into my head. But yeah, I anything I think that could mitigate that in theory.
Great, thank you. Christina, I see your hand. I can't hear you, unfortunately.
It's
You're
okay.
muted, Christina. There you go.
I just go on my speaker. Sometimes my headphones act up.
Still can't hear you at all. Is it just me?
Fall into another room.
I thought we heard her briefly.
I heard you briefly, Christina. Maybe once you get settled, we'll be able to
So
hear you.
basically, I wanted to piggyback off of that. Um, sorry, he just chased me into the room. It's really hard to multitask. Yes, youth programming. School's about to end. There's like a few more weeks left, so it's not just after school programming. I think we got to think about training. For a lot of, for example, if you're a high school student and you want to do a summer research program at a university, you need a certain GPA. How can we make those programs available to young people without a GPA requirement? In fact, those are the young kids that might need it the most that aren't getting those services, resources, and mentorship. So really into that, wondering how maybe we can work with some of the community centers like Jacob Reese, like Boys and Girls, to do some of that program, and also to pay them for the skills building that they'll be participating in, and perhaps skills sharing that they can also do, because we're just assuming they don't have anything to give, which is definitely not true. I just want us to be careful with not criminalizing youth. That's really my biggest fear. As a young person who grew up in Giuliani and Bloomberg's era, like I really felt like a criminalized young person. So much that it still manifests as an adult, with my fear of police. And I just don't, if we really want to think about what a healthy society looks like and good community and police relationships, it's not just about, oh, they help give out a turkey or something, you know what I mean? Not that,
Yep.
we appreciate that too, but.
Yeah, well, and that's why it's always good to ask about push and pull mechanisms when we think about an issue. So thank you, Christina. Chris, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I want to just comment to add to what Christina said. I mean, the city's done a pretty darn good job of funding programs for elementary and middle school youth, but there's a dearth of funding for high school youth. And if there's a group of kids who are getting into mischief and trouble, a traditional after school program for teens may not be the right thing. It has to be something captivating that's going to capture their attention, that's going to keep them there. And I agree with Christina, there has to be some kind of compensation for the young people for a project that they do. So I would agree with that. And then to Keon's point, I think having more cops on the beat, to use the old term, as opposed to in cars, not only enhances public safety, it allows police officers to get to know the community better. Because as you recall, there were a lot of folks during last year's conversations who said they didn't feel comfortable with the police, particularly, members of certain groups. So having police out on the street, having the opportunity to talk to people in a constructive, collaborative way, in addition to walking the beat, would be a really great thing. So I wanted to just add on to both Christina and Keon's point.
Right. Thank you. Are there totally net new topics folks want to highlight in terms of things you've heard over this year? Shehnaz? I know you always have your ears out.
I like to listening to it.
Okay.
I have a lot. My daughter's prom tomorrow, and a lot I have it.
No worries. Yeah, so then the next question that we can move into is what are things that are working that we want to make sure that we maintain? And Christina, I'd keep that in your back pocket for question 3. I think that we might have a way to get into that conversation. But right now, let's just take a moment of appreciative inquiry. What is working in public safety that we want to make sure that we're maintaining our investment in so that we don't lose it? If there's anything folks feel has been particularly successful, I would love to hear that.
I think it's wonderful that the 114 has maintained their monthly meeting. I mean, I think it's just such a good way to get specific requests or concerns out in the community from people that might not otherwise. I might add that they actually have it at a reasonable time too, starting at like 7:30. I often find that a lot of these things in other neighborhoods are often at times that people representative of the community often can't show up. So I personally think they've done a good job. I think there could be better follow-up if I had to offer up a critique. I think there's often a lot of concerns raised, but not often ways that they follow up with the next monthly meeting. So that might just be both a recognition and a suggestion as to how to make it more effective as well.
Awesome. So great reflection. And then I'm wondering, how might we identify a way to expand what works there budgetarily?
I would say
That
more
more community affairs officers. I think we have more than most, but I'm trying to. What are other ways that this can be supported through the budgetary process?
if I had to advocate for something, I think it would be more frequent meetings, but with specialized divisions within the NYPD. So I think what happens is at those meetings, there's a lot of concerns and they tend to kind of get aggregated into one meeting that we often run out of time for. So having a specific meeting that maybe is dedicated to traffic safety concerns, another that's dedicated to community affairs, right? Or like positive outreach. I think there's different ways to kind of split that up to make it more topical, to make for better use of time and therefore better use of resources.
That's great. I love that. And then now that I'm seeing, yeah, I know Hennick does some great work. I know Reese is involved as well in some of these opportunities. So perhaps it's expanded fund just in the comments for anyone who's not following along. To the previous thing would be expanded funding for high school age students to have either paid or programmatic opportunities.
Frank, I would just say, as much as I love to talk about Reese, there is a certain cohort of kids, young people who are not going to come to Reese. You know what I mean? It's too establishment. It's been around forever. They associate it with certain things, and there need to be new programs that are really geared towards more at-risk kids or kids who have not been attached to other programs in the past. I don't mind saying that. It's not just expanded funding for the existing programs, though we need it desperately, but new, more innovative programs that are going to get the hard to reach kids, the kids who are hanging out on Ditmars harassing folks, you know what I mean, or doing other stuff that we'd prefer they didn't do.
Great. And then Florence, I see your hand up.
I couldn't hear your second question, so I didn't get to write it down in my personal notes. I got question 1 and question 2. Would you be minding to repeat question 2?
No problem. In the spirit of appreciative inquiry, what are things that are currently going well for public safety in our community that we want to maintain and continue investing in? Are there anything else folks want to hold up as sort of success stories from the year that we want to make sure we continue to invest in? If not, I'm happy to move to question 3.
Can I just say we don't give money to the 114 Council? We're all aware of that, right?
Yep.
Yes.
But it's the spirit of what works and how might we fund more things like that. Great. So the final question, just to get us thinking in anticipation of the more rigorous work in the fall, is what are new realities that don't exist now but could be unfolding that we want to be prepared for? We know that the state of our neighborhood, Queens, the city, the country, etc., it's always changing. And so if there's any general trends people want to point to for us to be anticipatory with our budget suggestions, I'm happy to hear those as well. Yeah, new concerns that maybe are future looking versus past looking. I see hand from Christina.
Hey again. Oops. So I said in the comments, I know a lot of residents are concerned about ICE, both like their harassment of what we witnessed of delivery workers. And I know like just the normal resident being scared that anyone can get snatched up these days, really, regardless of your citizenship status. And so I know like a know your rights training is kind of something that some residents, particularly at the Family Enrichment Center that resettlement is doing, that they mentioned. And something that I also have been witnessing, and again, I don't want to criminalize young people, is a lot of young people in the playground cutting class. And like my heart breaks because I was one of those kids and I don't want to come for them or attack them, but I don't think they understand the implications of what they're doing, and how that really hinders their opportunities in the future. And like, I wish there was some kind of group or organization that would reach out to these young people, give them a safe space to hang out, and hopefully get them back into the classroom. That's just something that I witnessed that I get to speak to in our first question. And thank you so much for these great questions.
Thanks for just taking it piece by piece. One reflection we have, and this is a question I asked in the 114th community meeting back maybe about 5 months ago, is I asked specifically about immigration enforcement and Deputy Inspector Lynch, who is the commanding officer of the 114th, didn't just affirm the fact that the current NYPD policy is not to collaborate with ICE, but did so quite passionately. In particular, making sure the community knows that by not collaborating, we want to make sure folks, especially those who are victims of crimes, domestic violence, etc., know that they can come and report without fear from ICE. Now, obviously, things are primarily driven by, One Police Way, and it's a centralized thing. But we did get to hear a bit about the way that's happening now. And so I think the Know Your Training funding is a great idea. I know we had one even at the, I believe we had it at the 114th, not that long ago. Sorry, not in the 114th. We had it at one of our community board meetings not so long ago. But additional funding for that to get it way out there in the community, I think would be a great thing. And perhaps even doing that in conjunction with NYPD for them to affirm that, their role in that, and to make sure people know that they can report crimes even if they don't have, the documentation, I think would be a great thing for us to highlight. To the second point, I think we've captured that. Thank you for raising that concern. And also we can, I think, loop that into our programming for education, after school, summers, etc. Yes, Chris.
I just want to, raise this up. I think we all know it. Reese has done, will continue to do Know Your Rights trainings. However, no organizations that are conducting Know Your Rights trainings are now being targeted by the federal government, both the executive and the legislator. One of our sister settlement houses, a very large one here in New York City, the Chinese American Planning Council, has received requests from the Congressional Committee on Investigations asking them for reams and reams of documents. So I am not suggesting that we cower and hide. I suggest that we think about how to both request funding for and implement Know Your Rights trainings in a way that doesn't put the folks who would most benefit from the Know Your Rights trainings, as well as those who would lead and implement the Know Your Rights training, at any additional risk. Sadly, these are the times that we are in now, and those of us who run nonprofits, I'm sure Shahanaz would agree, are at particular risk.
Very helpful. I've added in the notes for this meeting that perhaps digital resources in relevant languages might be another a better way to leverage that funding request. Great. I'm just in the chat. Yes, Christina, we've actually heard quite a bit about this, so I think it's worth mentioning. This might fall into concerns all the way to question 1 and bringing it back. Is both drug use and or people having mental health crises in parks, and specifically near playgrounds, is a theme I have heard multiple times in our meetings and also at the 114th. If anyone wants to opine on that, I'm happy to hear more. But if not, I'll just write that down as a concern we've heard. While I write that down, Chris, is your hand back up? Happy to pass it back to you, or if that's from before.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't lower it. Sorry, Frank.
Sorry if you hear lots of kid noises. You can probably imagine it's nearing bedtime in a house of 3 children under 8. Great. Any other reflections? Thank you, Florence, for putting the 301 and the homeless support thing, the other information in there. Any other net new things? And any 3 questions? Concerns you've heard from the community, things that are going well you want to make sure we continue investing in, or changing realities we want to anticipate. We're coming to the end of the meeting, so this is a really good time to speak up if there's anything you want us to capture as we then start gathering data from our community. Violence interrupter groups, I'd actually, that is something that has come up several times. And I think more funding available for violence interrupter groups. I've read, for those who are unfamiliar, my previous role was in international peace building work. Violence interruption is one of the most cost-effective interventions if done well. So I'd be happy to write that down as something that we can continue to look at and invest in. Any other reflections?
Okay, I think we're going to take that silence as an end of this portion of the discussion. Frank, thank you. I want to echo Christina's thanks for those they were really probing questions, and they've gotten us off to a great start in the process. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to ask, and this is for community members only, is there any new business that you'd like to bring to the attention of the Public Safety Committee? If you're not a committee member and have new business or things you'd like to bring to our attention, please reach out to Florence directly at the district office, and she can certainly bring that to our attention. Frank.
Yes, just wanted to follow up that over the summer, Kian and I are looking to do some data analysis, just looking at trends, public safety trends in our community over time, and our community in comparison to other jurisdictions, or at least the average jurisdiction, just to give us a baseline understanding of where we sit, and and the kind of spatial and chronological understanding of safety. It helps. We get a lot of stats, but without context. We thought gathering that, doing some visualizations that make them digestible, and sharing them with community partners might be a really easy way for us to just reduce information asymmetry and help give us all more context as we start making important decisions, including with the budget. So we don't have any hard deadline on that. Kiana and I are just going to volunteer some time on it. If anyone is interested, you can reach out to either of the two of us.
Thank you both for leading that charge. And I know you greatly appreciate other folks who'd like to be involved in the project as well. So thank you for that. Any other new business before we wrap up? All right, everybody. I want to thank you all for your time, your attention. This was a great discussion. Florence, thank you for facilitating for us. This was a great meeting. We'll reconvene in the fall. I know many of us will be seeing each other on, is that tomorrow already? Tomorrow evening. I sadly will miss it, believe it or not. Reese has its board meeting on the night of one of the most important votes of the year. But I wish you all a good meeting tomorrow. And the committee, as I said, will see you all in September. So thanks so much for everybody. Have a great evening.
Chris, thank you so much for your leadership. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate the kind words. Thank you, Frank. Good night.
Good night,
Florence, do
everyone.
I end this or does somebody else turn this off? Okay. I don't touch anything, right? Okay.
Bye. Bye, Chris.
Take care,
Bye,
everyone.
Christina. Bye, everyone.
Thank you again, Florence.
Great night.
I rest that voice, although it sounded much better later on in the meeting. That'll do it. All right. Take care.